So we are on air. Hello and welcome to the show. So it's another round of LIBER webinars today, and we start slowly because people are still coming in. And you are all welcome to join us today for a webinar with Juliane Schneider. We will talk about data curation from a practical perspective, and you all are, of course, welcome to ask questions and during the webinar or later. You likely have noticed that there's a chat, and you can also express your views through smileys or whatever during the webinar. And as always, the webinar will be recorded. So our colleague from the LIBER office, she's taking care of putting the webinar recording online, likely already tomorrow, but very, very soon after the webinar. And yeah, so overall duration is likely between 45 minutes and an hour. We will keep an eye on the time. Yeah, so and today, as I said, we have Juliane Schneider with us. She has a long experience in terms of she's a specialist in metadata and ontologies and discovery, and she will share with us her experiences and views on data curation. So, and I and my colleague Rob. So let's see. So Rob is the head of the Research Data Management Working Group together with Mikey Yetten, who couldn't join us today. And as you will know, I have been serving as the co-chair as well, but I'm now in a different role in LIBER. So we have a couple of questions for you, Jan, after, but we look forward to your comments and questions, of course, and then we'll see how it goes. So I hand over to Juliane, who's preparing herself. So yeah, take it away, Juliane.
All right, thank you very much, and welcome to everyone on the call. I was asked to give a presentation on curation, data curation from a practical standpoint. So I thought I would do it through telling some stories about my time in research data management, mostly at UC San Diego from 2014 to 2016, and in my current job as, let me bring this up, success. As the team lead and lead data curator for Eagle Eye at Harvard Catalyst, which is Harvard's Clinical and Translational Science Center. Eagle Eye is an open platform, open ontology, RDF database full of records for research objects. So it has things like people, institutions, transgenic mice, stem cells, instruments, anything you might find in a lab or use for research. So my current job is sort of tending to that. And what you need to know for this is the stories I'm telling are from a United States perspective. Being in the informatics field, I often follow what Elixir is doing, and the perspectives and the growth of European versus United States research data management thoughts are slightly different and are at different places. So what I'm talking about is from the US perspective. I am a metadata discovery expert from the time I graduated library school and don't have a lot of experience in the liaison role, but I'll try to sort of cover that perspective because most research data teams are fairly small, and so everybody does a little bit of everything. When I started in 2014, the landscape was different. Institutional repositories were really what people were concentrating on. There were some disciplinary repositories, but not nearly as many as there are now. And there wasn't a lot of consortial efforts. There was very much per institution repositories. The US was following a standard called FGDC for geospatial metadata, and it was on the cusp of being somewhat replaced at the request of funders by ISO 19115. So that was a fuzzy area. FAIR data principles were not yet published, so FAIR wasn't even a thing. Privacy standards were thought about, but not nearly in the kind of forefront they are now. We had 2 collections come through that had those issues. One was an MRI set, so MRI images, and that, of course, we had to think about in context of the HIPAA Act. And we had another interesting collection on Mexican voting data. And when we went in to look at the actual data, it was by household and they had the address. So we could not put that in our repository because our repository at the UCSD is totally open. So that one didn't go in. But we actually had to look at the data to find that out. And finally, data science training was just starting to be recognized as something that is a crucial service for research data management and for the people who do the services. So my first story is about the repository. UC San Diego has a repository called the Digital Collections, and it's rather unique in that it houses not only research data collections, but traditional library archival digital collections. They're actually in the same place and use the same data models. It is a Fedora-built database with Hydra/Samvera and has a Solr index. It's completely homegrown by UC San Diego. We had a very large and very responsive technology team for the library. It was actually dedicated to the library. So that made the open platform option almost an easy choice. We had the people resources to keep it going. It made it very flexible for us because we could go to them as the metadata department and say, I want to add a label, I want to add a metadata field to this data model, and they could do it fairly quickly. So we had a really good working relationship with the tech department, and we were able to customize this repository to our needs. On the other hand, the more we customized it, the more fraught updates would become. When the platform itself is updated, we would have to figure out how that would affect all of the customization we'd done. If we had gone with the proprietary route, it would have been upfront more expensive, but it would have been more stable. It would have had built-in support and troubleshooting, and we probably would have had some user group support. On the other hand, we would have lost the flexibility. And the other issue is, if you use open platform, you have control of your data. If you use a proprietary and you put your data in, you may have problems getting it out. It's also siloed in that you probably won't be able to get it to work with other systems in your library or wherever your RDM lives, to make it work with other things within your institution. And we loved our repository. We absolutely loved it because it was really great. It was complex, it was flexible. But as we started doing researcher interviews and consultations, what I found was we really weren't sure what we were. We went in to every meeting with a researcher with a very scripted, very detailed presentation about our repository. And we tended to take the view of what I would call a data archive. Very extensive metadata, asking for a lot of history, asking for a lot of context. And that takes a lot of work, and it's very slow. But we really didn't think about being what I would call a depository, a kind of tool where a researcher needs to publish their data for a funder or a publisher, and it's research in progress, and you may have minimal metadata. It's a different scenario altogether. Now we can do both. We did have these very complex data models, But we could also put things in with minimal metadata. What I had to go back and figure out was what exactly was our scope. And we needed to stop just presenting being data archivists. We were also data managers. So we needed to offer that first option of quick deposits and sort of tackle things like versioning and what happens when they want to withdraw it to continue with the research. Those were questions we really hadn't tackled yet. The other thing about repositories is sustainability. This is the one I manage now. It was created in 2010, so it's old, and it looks pretty good for that era. But it was grant funded. The grant money ran out quite a while ago, so we are in maintenance mode. We don't do development. And it's what we call a distributed node network. So there's 30 plus institutions who have their own eagle eye node that they control, they manage. I can't get in and touch their data, but we have a central search that searches across all of these nodes. So you can find a microscope somewhere else that you might be able to use, or you can find your stem cell line or your virus or mouse, wherever it may be. Sustainably, this is great in that it cuts down my curation activities. However, if for some reason they want to close down their node, they can. And there's often good reason for it, but we might lose that data. So I have a limited control over widespread sustainability. It's a triple store. It's completely ontology controlled, and it's very stable. We've had very little downtime. But if you look at this and you come across this, you have no idea what's in this database. There's not a lot of indication, because most people want to see filters. They want to see, okay, these are the possibilities that I have. The only way you get there without typing something in that box is if you don't type something in that box and you hit the blue go button. And there's nothing on that page that indicates that that's what you should do. So I really want to put something on there that makes that obvious, but I don't have the funds. I also would love to Dockerize our node upload process. So if you want to create a node, you can. Literally anyone can create a node because all of that is open. The process is open, but it's very complicated because it's 2010 and technology has moved on. So I would like to Dockerize it, but again, I don't have the funds. So there's that issue of sustainability. No matter how good your repository is, you have to think that going forward, you will eventually be left behind. And how do you keep up and how do you get the resources to do that? When we finally started doing researcher meetings and we had our services up and running at UC San Diego, we were going in with a lot of assumptions because this was very new and no one had really done it before, at least at UCSD. So we went in love with our beautiful repository, and we thought that they were going to all want to put their data in there, and they were all really excited about permanent identifiers and complexity and relationships between stuff and data security. And they were not interested. They wanted help with standards. They really needed help with their funding requirements because they were worried about that. They had a huge problem moving large sets of data around, which I'll talk about later, and everybody wanted help with storage. And it was kind of funny because we would go in and do this presentation on our repository, and I started watching the researchers, and about 10 minutes in, all of their eyes would go dead, and I began to realize that we couldn't start with that. We needed to start by asking them the first thing, what they needed, and much of the time there was a portion of something in our repository that could help them. Not necessarily downloading their data, but in the context of permanent identifiers or storage or something, well, not storage, but metadata uploading things. But I could also point them to where to get storage, because there were several different options on campus for getting more storage. So I was able to not help them myself, but I knew where to send them. And that's really all they wanted. They wanted to know where to go. There were some interesting roadblocks with UC San Diego. It's a huge campus. It's 3,000 acres, the main campus. We were also serving Scripps Institute, which was down the hill via a bus ride. The campus was bisected by canyons, so it was very hard to get around. Data was stored on unnetworked servers much of the time. I would do an office visit with a researcher and they would show me their area, and I would find a closet with a server and a grad student, and the only computer that would be networked to that server was the computer that was also in the closet. This happened more times than I can remember. And they didn't have a way to securely transfer the data. And this was because when you join UC San Diego, like any other institution, you get your institutional email, you get your links to the servers that you have access to, et cetera. A lot of these researchers got those things and then immediately went to Google and did all of their email, did all of their storage on Google or Dropbox or something that was not connected to UCSD servers. So they had no way to transfer data either between themselves or when they did want to give us their data to us. And the only way that we could actually make that happen was we created a way to securely transfer data through a link. I won't get into it, it was complex, but it worked. However, they had to be on our servers, because our servers where we stored their data for the repository was on the UCSD network. They had to reactivate their administrative credentials, which would often take 3 months because, of course, they'd forgotten their password. So we would have to put that in, wait for 3 months, hope that they didn't leave, hope that they didn't forget us, and that they still wanted to deposit their data with us once all of that was sorted out. We did not have a university-wide mandate. We had a lot of encouragement. Our program was funded through a chancellor's initiative, so there was high-level support, but it wasn't this dedicated mandate toward good data practice and best data practice. And I had no researcher profile system. There was no way for me to find out who was on campus doing what research. And when you have 3,000 acres with canyons, it's kind of hard to get around to everywhere and kind of do meet and greets or go to lectures and make those relationships happen. One of the stranger things that I encountered was language. I knew I had to learn the language of my researchers, but I forgot that I had my own disciplinary language. So I was talking to a bunch of archaeological grad students who wanted to deposit their data into our system. And they were a little worried because they wanted to embargo it for a while. And I said that was fine, we could embargo. So I was really selling it, and I was talking about ARKs. And ARKs are archival resource keys, and they're the type of URI that UCSD used for their repository. So I'm going on about my ARKs, and the students kept looking more and more worried and distressed. And I finally said, "What's wrong? Is there something you don't understand?" And they said, "Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry, but our dig was a Jordanian mining town. We don't have any ARKs," because their ARK was a quest object in a blockbuster movie with an archaeologist hero. And they, I guess, thought that I was expecting a boat. And all they had were pottery shards and some iron tools. And I'm like, "No, that's fine. I was not expecting a boat from you." So we're all good. But it made me mindful of my acronyms, especially if they were concerned with granular type of curation stuff. As I went through my curation journey, I ended up dealing with a lot of different partners, and they were often the best ones weren't the ones that I expected. I was sort of expecting Funding Office and Scalcom to be my partners, but honestly, they were so busy with all of their own changing issues that they were supportive but didn't have really much time to collaborate. So where we ended up really getting the support was student groups. They were coming to us with their needs and telling us what they needed, and that was fantastic. We worked with them quite a bit at UC San Diego, doing workshops and such. And research computing, if you can get together with your research computing clusters, they can help you with everything. They can help you with storage, they can help you with training, they can help you with getting researchers to collaborate. I met the director of the Harvard Research Computing Cluster for Faculty of Arts and Sciences at a conference, and we ended up chatting, and he got me onto the Research Computing Council of Harvard, and it has been immensely helpful because now I know where everything is. I know where all of the services are and what they're doing and what they're proposing to do. And that's been very helpful when I need to give people advice. So research computing can be a really great resource for a research data management program. What is success? This has been sort of interesting because we did a forum at UC San Diego for Scripps Institute of Oceanography. We brought lunch, so everybody came, and we went through, and each of us sort of highlighted the services that we did. So I talked about my metadata consulting and date formats, whatnot. And what happened was we got a full room, and there was kind of dead silence after we finished, and then someone from the back of the room shouted, "What about ISO 19115?" And as a standards person, it was directed at me, and of course I said, "Which one is that?" Because ISO has a lot of standards, and I really didn't know what it was. And he said, "It's the geospatial metadata standard, and we need to know what it is because it's going to be required." And I said, "Oh, all right, I'll go get the standard and I'll read it, and let's start talking about doing some crosswalking of the metadata." And that relationship turned into a really great working relationship that spawned dataset deposits, it spawned workshops, lots of meetings. It really was great. This one question grew into a major collaboration. After the meeting sort of started breaking up and people were leaving, a researcher came up to us and said, "I did a study in 1973, and the data is sitting on my bookshelf ever since, and it's on computer paper, and it is fading. Could you digitize it for me? And I'd love to deposit it in your repository." And our library had a really good digitization group, and so we said yes. We didn't ask them first, which I don't recommend doing, but it worked out for us because they were thrilled to do it. But we kind of committed them beforehand. And this is what it looked like. I mean, this had been sitting in the same place since 1973, which actually doesn't look too bad, but in 5 years it might not be legible. So our digitization people turned it into CSV files and an Excel file and a PDF. So we had all these formats for it. And what's interesting about this collection is she was studying Holobates, which is the only bug that lives its entire life on the top layer of the Pacific Ocean. And she was studying the heavy metals that were present in these bugs that they picked up from living on the film of the ocean. So this data is one of the few data sets that exist from the 70s that tell you what the composition of heavy metals are on the Pacific Ocean film, the top level. And this could be really important for environmentalists, ecologists, any number of other researchers. And this had been sitting on paper on a bookshelf. We later also found out it got the Nature cover. Her studies were on the cover of Nature in 1973. So as a result of this forum, we found this historic collection, historic for UCSD because it's a Nature cover collection, but also it's because it's this set of data that, as far as we could tell, and we searched, was one of the few, if only, collections that gave us a picture of what the Pacific Ocean heavy metal content was like in the 70s. Well, we never held another forum because we considered it a failure. We thought we were going to get, 14 data sets and we were going to make all these connections and it was going to be this huge deal. And I subscribed to that for a long time, but looking back on it, it was an incredibly successful forum and we should have continued doing it. Because after an hour, we had a question that led to a continuing relationship, and we discovered a data set that's historically important and probably would have been lost had we not done this. So when you're doing your research curation activities, remember what success looks like on a small scale and that it grows. It's easy to be discouraged because data curation's a long process, but and it's also a process that is about relationships, and relationships and trust grow slowly. So I'd say keep that in mind and be kind to yourself and remember that the small successes really do add up. Finally, data training. I was never a teacher. I never wanted to be a teacher, and I had no interest in teaching. However, I had a colleague at UCSD, Tim Dennis, and Tim was our data librarian. And he had a bunch of grad students coming to him and saying, we need to learn R and we don't know it. And the faculty that we're working for need us to know it to do our jobs. So Tim went out looking for some materials to teach R and found software carpentry. He also found out there was someone, I think he was a faculty member at UCSD that was a certified instructor. So he got together with this guy and they set up a 2-day workshop, I believe, in R and Python. It might have been 1 day, just R, I can't remember. But anyway, they had a 50+ person waiting list after 2 days. So Tim has found something that really is needed on campus. And as it turned out, I'm not sure what the sequence of events was, but he ended up doing the workshop for the School of Global Policy. And there was an economics professor there that was so impressed, he gave Tim $5,000 to have UCSD become an institutional member of software carpentry. And he also had Tim do a course on data science, a full course on data science as part of his curriculum. So a couple of students coming to Tim and saying, we need to learn R, sort of spawned this because Tim immediately recognized the importance of this. And it worked out for him because he was not satisfied with him teaching. He wanted me to as well. And part of our membership was that we had spots for a instructor training. And he made me go. And I was a little bit bored at this point. I didn't have a lot going on. So I said, fine, I'll go. And it turned out that I really loved it. And it's been an enormous tool for my continued professional success and effectiveness. And it's really kept me on top of my game with the tools that are used in research data management and data best practices. It's forced me to keep going with improving myself. I use GitHub and OpenRefine constantly, and especially GitHub. When I came to Harvard Catalyst, they use Bitbucket, which is the Atlassian version of GitHub. And the fact that I knew the workflow and that I knew cloning, pushing, pulling, that whole scenario of how you use that workflow already, they were thrilled because it is a large learning curve. But because I was involved in carpentries and instruction, I already knew that. So that was a huge boost on my getting acclimated to the job and to the way they did things. It also created really productive relationships with researchers because if you teach them, you tend to get in conversations about context and you learn what they're doing, what their data is, and what their needs are. So just teaching someone R or OpenRefine or Git can lead you to further services for their actual data. Finally, I'm looking at the time, seeing how I'm doing. Doing okay. Every institution is different. UCSD had its really strong points. We had a supportive administration. We had some funding. The researchers, for the most part, were very supportive. We worked with everyone from archaeologists to oceanographers to a computer science group that was doing 3D photography, which interestingly teamed up with the archaeologists. And so they did these amazing 3D renditions of archaeological sites. And they were like full-sized walkthrough things. They were amazing. And so we actually got that data and curated it. And so start with your strong points and work from there. The weak points for UC San Diego was the siloed data, the infrastructure, how large the campus was and how scattered. So we managed to sort of solve some of that infrastructure issue because we did get the data transfer issue somewhat solved, but really concentrating on the relationships and just spreading the knowledge that we were there and that we were available was really what got us going. Know what your mission and scope are and start small. You can always add to your scope, but if you start with, we do 10 things, and you find out you can only do 5 things, or 5 things well, when you scale back, people get upset. You don't do that anymore, even though no one ever used it. The perception of scaling back doesn't look good. So start small and do some things well and build from there. Find the crevasse, fill and bridge them. Tim was really good at this, obviously. He would find all these holes and come up with solutions, and people loved it. If you can make someone's life easier, they will love you, especially when it's something really small that you don't think is very important. It's important to them if it bothers them every day. So doing something as simple as giving them some date format scripts or showing them how to do date transformations in OpenRefine can really help someone out. Be kind to yourself and recognize your successes. Don't consider things failures if you don't get the big reaction. Small reactions are okay. And I think that is it. And I think it is time for questions.
Thank you, Juliane, for this presentation. Interesting to listen to you and to learn, to hear from your experiences and to learn from that. We have a few questions prepared. What would be your sort of primary best advice for libraries that want to get started with deploying curation services? Would I need to hire generic staff? To what extent is the role of standards important?
Uh,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry. Um, I would say that can be different from institution to institution, especially since sometimes they scatter RDM services in different areas. So sometimes some of the pieces will live in the research computing area, and some of the pieces live in the library, and sometimes the funding office does some things. So I think the first thing you do is take a look at the landscape of your institution and figure out what services aren't being met yet or aren't being met adequately, and scope it out from there. What skills do you need to hire for that aren't there already? And as far as standards go, that's tricky because every discipline has their own. So
Yeah.
that can often be something that is on the fly. I mean, I had to go out and buy the 19115 standard because I didn't know what it was, and I had to read it and learn what it was about. So oftentimes that's something that just happens as you go.
Yeah, thanks. We have a question from the audience. Actually, it's close to the question I had. So, would it have helped to have a university-wide mandate at that time at UCSD?
Oh yes, I think it really does help. It reminds me quite a bit of back in the day when I was the metadata librarian for Harvard Medical School, and we were trying to get an open access mandate through, which didn't go through the faculty. Um, but I think data is a lot easier than that because data is broader and has less personal consequences than open does for faculty, open access. I think the hardest part about the mandate, once you get it, is communicating it. So many researchers live in little tiny worlds that are not necessarily accessible. And especially if you've got a situation like UCSD, where they're not even checking their official email, they're not going to get those announcements. So that's the challenge. I think that's the communication of the mandate and what it says.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But if I would reformulate that question, for example, if we would have a mandate at our university, and I would have to set up a sort of production street for curating data sets, would you go for the minimal metadata set approach, or how would you approach this?
Oh, yeah. Actually, I didn't quite answer the question, I guess, in the sense that I think a mandate is really useful because it's something you can point to, and it often is in language that everyone understands. It takes us out of our curator language a little bit. As far as restate that, please. I just
Well, we're about the brink of at our university to having deployed a mandate where every data set needs to be deposited, and there's these sort of great expectations that this data will be reused and needs to be curated. And so currently we have little or no data sets, and that could radically change if everyone needs to deposit their data sets. And then the question is from how do we set up a production street that comes close to, well, sort of the minimal metadata description to make these data findable and to live up to some of the expectations in terms of, okay, you have this data and to what extent can they be findable, to what extent will they be richly described, and so on and so on.
Yes, that is a huge problem. Well, not a problem, it's a challenge. I'll be positive. It's a challenge. I'd say that there's a couple of issues. One is reuse. Reuse seems to be something that's talked about a lot and not often done.
Right.
So I'm wondering about the amount of time and effort we are spending on making things so reusable when maybe it's spent elsewhere. But that said, we do need to make some sort of effort. So I would say minimal metadata is good. If you are expecting a large influx of data from the very top, on a very practical level, and I'm getting really practical here, find a way to batch load. So get your minimal metadata that allows it to be found. Make everyone fill out those 5 or 7 or whatever the minimal metadata is, and find a way to be able to batch load that into whatever repository you have. The other thing is, the thing that I've been grappling with recently is we just used our Eagle Eye platform with a new ontology for educational resources. And we did a proof of concept with a local group, our postgraduate education department, who does a lot of content. And then they have these, individual videos. Well, every course had a video titled Introduction. Well, if you've got 17 documents or videos titled Introduction, that's not very helpful when it comes to searching or picking through them with the user. So I would say that one of the big challenges you're going to face is the way researchers title things.
Right.
You haven't gotten to them yet with the piece about naming and file structure. So.
Yeah. Thanks for this. There's a question from Martin Donnelly. Do you have any additional tips on how to deal with problems of scale/geography? Not sure what Martin means with scale.
Maybe big data sets and size.
Yeah.
We dealt with that quite a bit with scripts because oceanographers have huge data sets. They tend to be data sets full of whale noises, and we actually had an emeritus professor give us his entire collection, and it was massive. And we ended up it took a lot of time to get the data. It took us 6 months to sort through everything because it was a lifetime of work. And sometimes we weren't able to handle, I'm rambling. Anyway, that worked. We did have some people come to us with their acoustic data, and it was too big for us to handle. And we found a disciplinary repository that could take it. The upshot of that, though, was it turns out that their acoustic data contained naval military information because U.S. submarines were doing war games off the coast of La Jolla, California, which is very near where Scripps launches their boats and does a lot of their acoustic work. So we weren't able to make that public because it had classified information in it. So that's yet another wrinkle in data. You may have classified sub information embedded in your whale noises.
Okay. Well, this is a webinar about curation, but you also talked about research computing and software carpentry. So if we talk about selling, so new services, would you advocate that when libraries would be starting with curation services to package that together with information services on research computing, software carpentries, etc., so to bundle that together?
Yes, the way it really worked at UC San Diego was that we got very lucky in that we did have, tech resource computing tech services in the library that was, for the library. IT on UC San Diego's campus was kind of scattered. However, we also had the San Diego Supercomputing Center, who was really great partners with us. So we could draw on them as well, and we did. However, it was funny because Tim Dennis, who was the data librarian, was part of the reference team. So he wasn't actually in the program in the department, but he was crucial in helping us with his knowledge on data sets, and also he was really an excellent instructor and got that started, and then sort of melded into our services. So a lot of this was by chance. We didn't plan on it. I think because this was so new, we didn't have a model. But I would say it really depends on the size of the institution. I'm saying it depends a lot because I find institutions to be so different. But I'd say partner with who makes sense, and don't dismiss anything if it sounds a little weird, because it might, if you investigate it and give it a chance, it might actually turn out great. I never thought that I never thought student groups would be such a great source of knowledge about what the faculty needed. So that was interesting.
Right. Maybe you can read the question of Martin. Also, he mentioned something else than it was not about big data. So I think you talked
Yes.
about the, for example, if I can remember correctly, having 29 nodes or so and a very distributed campus. So would you have had librarians all over the place to assist in curation, or how did you manage?
Yeah, the scale and geography was really challenging. And there was no way that if every researcher on campus suddenly came to us at UCSD and said, we need your services, we would have been overwhelmed. What I tried to do was start with the people who were really interested in working with us and letting word of mouth percolate a little bit. Because you can't do everything at once. And if I was going to fail, I'd rather fail in a very small scale than a very large scale. And it was interesting too, because we did end up working a little bit with the medical school and center, which was yet again on another campus. So we kind of went beyond what we expected. But I would say it's just starting with the people that really want to work with you and letting it kind of spread out. This also depends on the attitude of your upper administration, what their expectations are, and how they want to go about communicating this, especially if they do have a mandate that they're very interested in getting out there. So again, I think start small, but you have to take into consideration what the upper level administration wants from you.
Okay, thanks. Another, I think, very interesting question we had from our co-chair, for example, is, well, what's your opinion on how to engage researchers?
I listen to them a lot. By engaging, I guess, if you're trying to let them know you're around, what I would do, and this is another problem with the distributed campus, I would go to a lot of lectures. I'm an ontologist as well, so language is my thing. And in order to learn the language of the people who I'm trying to serve, I would attend lectures, receptions, events, anything I could to try to just start talking to people, learn what they're doing, introduce myself, give the service a face and a name and a conversation. That led to a lot of the data sets that we got. And it also led to a lot of work on standards and a lot of work on the funding requirements, because that's really what they were expressing to me about what their needs were. As far as once you get there, once you have a meeting with a researcher, I always tried to have the meeting in their offices, and I would schedule an hour because that's what they would want. But I would actually put 3 hours in my schedule, because once I got there, they would not shut up. They were so happy someone was interested in their work and someone was there to listen to what their issues were. I never made it out of there under 3 hours. I saw more oceanographic equipment and archaeological stuff than I ever thought I'd see, because they want to show it all to you. So once you get in their offices and start talking, the engagement just seems to happen. It was very rare that, we just chatted for a few minutes and I left.
Okay. Well, what's the last question? Also from the audience, please, if you have any further questions, write them down. I'm happy to take one last question. In the meantime, what do you consider as sort of the main challenges for curation right now?
Oh, I think it's really tough, A, to scale, and B, to define what it is and who's going to do it. It's, in a way, it's a victim of its own hot topicness. It's what everyone's jumping on, but in so many ways, it's a lot. It's hard work. A lot of it's kind of mundane. I mean, no one loves reading a million standards. I mean, maybe someone does, but if they do, they kind of scare me. But that's the kind of work that actually is useful and needful. And getting back to that can be difficult when we've got all of these huge initiatives that are they're sort of vague. They use big buzzwords, but they're sort of vague. There's not a lot of specifics out there. So it's kind of hard to bring all of this, open research data management down to something that we can grasp and work with. I think that's really tough.
Thanks, Juliana. I think we're through. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk, lecture, webinar. I'll now give back to Birgit to close the session.
Yeah. Thank you very much from my side as well, and thank you very much to the audience. I hope you enjoyed this webinar, and yeah, hope to see you back in our next edition. And please let us know if there's anything you would like to us to organize, and so get in touch and see you around. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.